Welcome to the 11th part of the ADAS Model and Government Intervention lecture of the Introduction to Economics course. This lecture series is prepared for the Milos Technical University Northern Cyprus campus. And in this part, I will basically talk on two principles that are used as a guidance by some economists for the monetary policies. And then we will start looking to the practice questions. First principle is called the Taylor's rule. Actually, the rule is expressed by a formula which is like that. So the formula basically states this: this interest rate the central banks are setting through the adjustment of the money supply should be set to keep the inflation rate low. Which means if inflation rate is high, governments should put in place contractionary monetary policies for which they need to increase the interest rate. So basically, inflation rate will affect the interest rate positively. It will increase it according to it should increase it according to Taylor's law. And basically, if the unemployment is, however, high, and here we basically see look how much the unemployment is actually diverging from Nairo. If unemployment is higher than Nairo, that unemployment gap will be positive. In that case, since we have a minus sign here, the interest rate will decrease. This is the case where you have a recession. Unemployment is higher than Nairo, and that will, in that case, in order to improve the economic system, you need to decrease the interest rate and increase aggregate demand. However, if the unemployment gap is negative, that's the case where your unemployment is lower than Nairo, then you have a kind of inflationary gap. That means you should also increase the interest rate. So this unemployment gap will be negative. So this whole term will be positive. So this will increase the interest rate. How did Taylor created these numbers? It is calculated basically for the United States. For the United States, when you keep the interest rate, calculate interest rate according to these numbers, according to Taylor, you always set a monetary policy which will make you return to the potential output. So this is Taylor's rule. Well, another rule is, of course, inflation targeting, basically. Instead of using a formula, you should basically target in inflation, for example, 3%, 4%. Again, most countries are targeting a low inflation, but still positive inflation rate, like 2, 3, 4, 5%. You should target that inflation, and if the inflation is higher than this rate, then you will put contractionary monetary policies to reduce inflation. And if the inflation rate is lower than that rate, then you put expansionary monetary policies in place. Since at stable at potential output, the inflation is stable, and inflation only increases if there is a inflationary gap, and decreases when there is a deflationary gap. By keeping inflation rate constant, you are also keeping economic system at the potential output rate according to this view. So we come to the part where we were basically explaining, where we will basically were looking to the topic of this lecture. Now we can start to the practice questions. I'll go a little bit fast on this part, but just a little bit. If there's an inflationary gap within the economic system, how will economy will correct itself in the long run? If there's an inflationary gap, that means the output level is, this is the case, the output level is higher than the potential output level. In that case, basically, there will be inflation. That inflation will increase the expected inflation rate. As expected inflation rate increases, the short-run aggregate supply will shift, and with some fluctuations, it will bring the economic system back to the potential output level. So economy will be corrected by the decrease in the short-run aggregate supply level as a result of increase in the expected inflation rate. The answer, the next question. Assume nominal wages in the economic system falls down. How will this, the short-run equilibrium point and price change? How will long-run equilibrium point and price change? So this is the case of positive demand shock. Let's start with the equilibrium point. Well, let's start with the. So we start with this point. The decrease in the nominal wages will shift the supply, short-run supply to this point, maybe because there is a cheap labor force flowing to the country, which maybe doesn't have an effect on the long-run aggressive supply curve. Maybe people are desperate. People, for some reason, there is a flood. They need to earn more money. They need more jobs. I don't know. Some factor has decreased the wages people are demanding in the economy. We don't know what factor. Maybe workers are less organized because of certain problems, certain mistrust between them. So short-run aggressive supply will shift, which will decrease the price level and increase the output level. In the long run, however, this increase in the output level above the potential will create an increase in expected inflation rate. So we will return to the old point with the same price and the output level. So in the short run, we have a decrease in price level and increase in output level. In the long run, nothing will change. So, what type of a shock will lead to a new long-run equilibrium point, equilibrium with lower price level? You want a new long-run equilibrium point with lower price level. You will always return to the old output level. If you have a supply shock, you will always return back to the old level. So it should be a demand shock. Which demand shock? Basically, if you have a negative demand shock, basically, this is positive demand shock. If you have a negative demand shock, basically, let me show it to you. Okay, if you have a negative demand shock, your demand shifts here, and economy returns to the old to the potential output level as a result of traditional adjustment, automatic adjustment process. In that case, supply will shift here. Basically, you will return to this point. You will go to this point where you have you will have a same output level, but at a lower price. So negative demand shocks will, in the long run, bring you to the same output level at a lower price. As a result of, let's say, rightward shift increase in the short-run aggregate supply level in the long run. So, this is the question 3, I believe. Some economists think when governments increasing spending, this will crowd out private spending. Write an argument that can support this idea. But if the governments increase the spending, this will increase the initially the output level, which will increase the interest rate, and that increase in interest rate can feed back to decrease the investment level. As a result, basically output level. Well, the increase in government spending might crowd out the investment spending. Actually, I want to ask this question because it's related to the background part. So you might think this question as a thought principle. If governments follows the rules, Taylor's rules principle as a way to conduct monetary policy, when should government increase the interest rate? Either if you experience a deflation, which is the case, or in that case the inflation term in the Taylor's rule will be 0, or in case you have a positive unemployment gap, your unemployment is higher than 9. Of course, if you have both inflation and positive unemployment gap, then the effect of unemployment should be greater. Oh, that's the decrease in interest rate. So the increase in interest rate is the opposite case. You should have either inflation, high inflation, or maybe negative unemployment gap, which means your unemployment is lower than the NAIRO. By the way, if you use the Taylor's rule, note that you should use, when you use unemployment gap, for example, or inflation, for example, when you have 10% inflation, you write 10, not 0.1. Or if you have a 2% unemployment gap, that means, for example, 8% unemployment at 6%. When NAIRO is 6%, 8 minus 6 is 2. In that case, you write 2%, not 0.02, which could be a way to write the percentage just in, let's say, in a different way. So you use 10, not 0.1, for example. So this was the last question. Now we can go to the mathematical questions. So if inflation rate is 20%, unemployment gap is 5%, what should be the interest rate according to Taylor's rule? So inflation is 20. Inf U gap is how much? 5. So interest rate IR should be 2.07 plus 1.28 times inflation minus 1.8 times U gap. So 17.77%. Very simple, basically. Assuming inflation is 20, what should be unemployment gap to make the interest rate zero according to Taylor's rule? So what should be the unemployment rate to make the interest rate zero? Well, basically here what you should do is this. Well, now you use this. When inflation rate is 20, so in order to make this zero, this term minus this term should be zero. So basically 1/95 times unemployment gap should be equal to this amount. So this is 20. So this is equal to 2.07 plus 25.6, I believe, which is equal to 27.67. 20. So unemployment gap is just equal to 27.67 divided by 1.95. So 13.67 in this case. Actually, a little bit more than that. 14.18. So this is the answer. So we will see the last two questions in the next part. See you in the next part.